Hello, YouTube. This is Mike, and welcome to the 4 Things That Heal BPD and NPD Abuse channel. And today we are going to take a look at some real world examples of how the partner of the narcissist or the borderline is actually trapped in a very serious delusion and spiritualization of their abuse. When you know you're really addicted to abuse, when you start to spiritualize it and you start to justify it based on spiritual destiny. And there's no shortage of people who are actually quite trapped. They are trapped in abuse. They can't get out. They want to get out. And so in order to justify being trapped and addicted to the abuse, they will say anything that will justify staying in an abusive relationship. And we are going to, I'm going to prove that to you by just simply reading a couple of the comments that are left here on the channel. So let's be clear what this channel is about. I am not a therapist. I am not a psychologist. I am not a licensed counselor. I have no agenda here. I'm not selling any books. I'm not a relationship life coach. I'm not a therapist selling books or trying to get clients. I'm just a human being like you, average, layman, and I got involved with a borderline, and it completely destroyed me, worse than anything I'd ever experienced in my life, and or brought out what was already in me based on childhood stuff, which we'll talk about. And I did some very specific things which actually completely cured and healed me of the trauma of that relationship, not of my entire life, just of that relationship. And because of that, I was able to look at the relationship completely differently. I don't have any negative feelings left over, no sadness, no anger, no self-righteous need for vengeance, no wishing I could make it work. You're going to hear people talk about, basically they're saying, I'm walking around limping, not in the relationship anymore, but I'm maimed and I'm limping, and it's okay, and it's not okay. So if you want to heal, you can stay till the end of this video, and I'll tell you the 4 things that I did that absolutely healed me from the trauma and the abuse of the abusive relationship. So let's talk about how we end up in these relationships. I sometimes joke around and I talk about how, people talk about dating their borderline or their narcissist as though they're just walking down the street one day, they're perfectly fine, everything's wonderful, and oops, I stepped into a bear trap. And so that could have explained my experience as well. I sort of felt that. I had, stepped into a bear trap. And so you take on the first delusion is you take on the belief that what happened to you was an accident, and therefore you're not a codependent because you were perfectly fine and you don't understand. She did this to me. She seduced me. She lied to me. For 2 years, she love bombed me. Therefore, it's not my fault. I couldn't have seen it coming. And people get very upset. One of the ways you know somebody's a codependent is because there's 2 things, because I'm finding now there's a whole new breed of codependent that is raising its head as a result of my channel. But first thing is that they will deny that they're a codependent. People hate the word codependent because it has the word dependent in it. In fact, I did a review of, I think Dr. Rosenberg's, I think he's a doctor, Dr. Rosenberg's book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, and he has renamed codependence as self-love deficit disorder. And he says, because I don't like the word codependent. And so regardless of what word you call it, because the reason why people don't like codependent is because it doesn't sound good. And the whole basic thing that is driving all codependence, whether it be the non-disordered partner or whether it's the borderline or the narcissist, what's driving it is the need to be seen as being perfect. So if you think some label makes you look less than perfect, you're gonna reject that. And so here we have a self-admitted codependent who's a therapist writing this book. I've already done my review on it, and he says he doesn't like the word codependent, so he changes it to more of a victim mentality thing, which is self-love deficit disorder. And that, interestingly enough, it does describe a state of codependence, and people like hearing that. But so that's level one. So what the level two denial that has arisen on my channel is people will say, and I know that I'm a codependent. And somehow that, saying that they know that, somehow that's a badge of honor, as though that knowledge and that, I'm admitting it. But they're not doing the four things. So again, wait till the end of the video and I'll tell you what the exact four things are that you can do to achieve healing. By the way, this is from my other channel, so you don't have to pay any attention to that. I just leave that on there because it's easier to leave it on there than take it off every time I make a video here. So let's talk about how do we end up in these relationships. The way we end up in these relationships, and there's some combination of this, otherwise it wouldn't have happened to you. Because the truth is, if you don't have self-love deficit disorder, if you don't have a deficit in your self-love, then what will happen is that you will not be attracted to borderlines or narcissists. And they will not be attracted to you. So you won't step in that bear trap, because that bear trap will see you coming and walk away from you. So if you got involved with a borderline and you fell in love and you got into a relationship, it means that you were already primed and ready to go. And the truth is that were unconsciously looking for a traumatic, abusive scenario so that you could replay unresolved issues in your own unconscious, this time trying to get it right. So how it starts is that there's something in your childhood, either in infancy, toddlerhood, or somewhere in your early psychological development where you were supposed to be, ideally, loved unconditionally, where your parents love you and celebrate you simply because you exist. They love you with all of your faults and with all of your peculiarities, and in fact, they turn your faults or your specific peculiarities into something beautiful so that you love your own individual expression in the world. You have healthy narcissism, and you have self-confidence, and you have, more specifically, what is called individuation, which means that you are comfortable being an individual. You have the ability to self-love. You have the ability to self-soothe when things don't go your way. You want something out of life and you don't get it, just being disappointed by life. You have the ability to pick yourself up and say, that's okay, Tiger, you can do it, go get him. You parent yourself through it. You have an introjected, loving parent that's constantly telling you how special and unique you are and how valuable you are simply because you exist. And that is what you didn't get. So you had some lack of that to some degree. And so what ends up happening is that you don't feel as though you have value simply because you exist. And therefore you were, either you got the impression or you were outright taught that your value was based on what you do for others. So you learned, if you were in a really abusive situation, you had an angry parent or a critical parent or a shaming parent or a non-existent parent, you got the message that you had to figure out what they were thinking and what they were feeling before they knew it, so that you could get ahead of that potentially traumatic, dangerous situation and fix them. And so your entire worth comes from making sure that they feel okay. That isn't because as a little kid you were just full of love. It was because you were desperately trying to survive. You were, number one, in some cases, trying to avoid outright abuse. And if it wasn't that, then you were desperately trying to be seen and approved of so that you could get the love that you desperately wanted. Our most basic instinct, in fact, it's more basic than eating. Our most basic instinct is to be loved. In fact, little infants, this has been proven throughout history. This is not me hypothesizing. It is a fact. It is a proven fact, not only scientifically, but also anecdotally, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. There's been all kinds of experiments done where if you have an infant, in fact, in one very famous experiment, an English king, a very narcissistic English king, who wanted to find out whether or not Hebrew was the original language of human beings, because at that time in Christianity, apparently people thought that Hebrew was this perfect language of God, and so if you didn't teach somebody a language, that they would begin spontaneously speaking Hebrew. And so in order to prove that, he took a bunch of orphans and put them on an island with some nurses and strictly told the nurses, under the threat of death, under no circumstances are you to communicate or to interact with these infants. Your only job is to feed them, to wipe their behinds, to clothe them, and the rest of the time you completely, totally leave them alone. Total neglect. And what happened is every single one of those infants died. It happens all the time. In fact, this is what creates narcissists and borderlines, is that they got just enough interaction that it didn't kill them. But they're still walking around with this introjected, horrific self-hatred, which you know because you've experienced, because you've been there. You are slightly removed from that. If you've ended up with a borderline or a narcissist, this is you. Maybe you don't have a personality disorder, but you still have this, it's a great word, this self-love deficit disorder, which is really, I would say, if you're going to use that term, I would say individuation deficit disorder, because you're not individuated. So you've been primed and ready, and all that happened is that your borderline or your narcissist saw within you what they have within themselves. And then that magnetic attraction comes together. That's what it is. It's not, I'm super loving and you're a narcissist and we are the perfect opposite fit. That's not it. You both have individuation deficit disorder, and like attracts like. Not opposites attract, like attracts like. You have different ways of dealing with it, so that seems opposite, but the core is 100% identical. That's why when you look into each other's eyes that first night that you decided that you were, long lost soulmates, it's because you saw yourself in them and vice versa. All right, so what happens is you get involved with them. They do target you. They definitely target you. They see you. They come after you. They target you, and they do love bomb you. They make you feel safe. You feel like this connection, like, oh my God, I've never felt so connected. I've never known anybody. You are my soulmate. And it's not because of any of those reasons. It's because somebody is there reflecting back to you the way that you feel. It creates a projected love. So you project onto them the love that you desperately want for yourself, and vice versa. They do the same. And this is why even the narcissist in the beginning gives off this message that I will mother you. I will mother you and fix you. The borderline does the same thing. I will mother you. I will fix you. You do the same thing to them. I will love you. I will mother you. And that is this is a dual projection and transference, where you transfer the love that your mother didn't take from you, and you transfer it onto your borderline, and they do the same to you. And you also project onto them when you say, I'm going to love you so deeply and completely that it's going to fix all of your problems. That is a projection. It means that's what you want them to do to you on an unconscious level. That's what makes it so perfect. But when both people are coming from a deep emptiness, the moment that projection and that transference wears off, guess what happens? You're miserable, and somebody's going to express that. On your end, you're watching this channel, you are the codependent, you are the non-disordered abuse victim, like Johnny Depp. You are on paper, you're the victim. What it means is that you are wanting to find a scenario where you can replay the abuse and or the neglect you experienced as a child. And this time you're going to get it right. This time you're going to fix it. And of course it doesn't work. But that need to keep replaying it is what keeps you in there. We call it a trauma bond. But the trauma is actually puts you back in a regressed state where if you don't get mommy's love, you're going to die. And that's a very real thing that happens to infants. But as you grow up and you keep coming from that regressed infantile state of, if I don't get mommy to love me, I'm going to die, you have that most powerful of instincts, which is self-preservation. And so that's why it doesn't matter how much I explain to you the borderline and how much I explain to you your codependence. That won't stop you. You won't be able to get out of it. And I mean, I could go through, there's so many comments where people say, I'm trying to get out. Hopefully I'll be able to leave. Hopefully I'll be able to heal. I'm finally out of the relationship. Hopefully I'll be able to heal. But the truth is that you're still regressed in that infantile, desperate need for survival. And you have made the fatal error of confusing abuse with love, because that's what was going on when you were an infant. So the thing that needs to happen is you need to individuate so that you become your own source of love, your own source of empowerment. And here's the kicker: that is going to be impossible. You won't be able to do it. That is why you have to do the 4 things. In my experience, if you don't do the 4 things, even if you are lucky enough to escape the relationship or if you are discarded, you will not completely heal unless you do the 4 things. The 4 things will, in fact, give you the ability to gradually self-individuate and heal from the relationship. I'll tell you what those 4 things are at the end of the video. Now, let me prove it to you. I'm going to read some comments. This first one I'm going to read, I'll just read the comment for you. This is in response to my video about Amber Heard being diagnosed. This person says, I've been watching your channel for a year now, Mike. That's a long time. I started watching when I ceased living with my borderline partner and began to heal. We are still together after almost 5 years, and I know that you'll be shocked or maybe even questioning if my partner even has BPD. But I can tell you that in our case, we went through years of so much trauma that we tore each other apart piece by piece. I left the home at the point of breakdown. I understand now that I am codependent. I take my share of the blame and accept why, all caps, we both are attracted to each other. There is power in that. It is a journey. I am healing whilst I am still committed to my relationship, albeit am unable to live with my partner at this time. I am helping her to do the same. We believe that if we do the work, one day we might be able to live together and have a relationship healthy enough to at least be non-toxic. I am learning how to have and keep boundaries. She is learning to control her fears and to start to learn how to care for herself. I could go on, he says, but my point is that there is a reason we come together and so much harm and trauma takes place. We can leave or we can stay and take the lessons. If we can both, all caps, heal and come back to the relationship whole. Wouldn't that be the highest form of relationship possible? Or am I deluded? How can we know? The only way out is through. All right, so my first take on this is that this is exactly what I'm talking about. With no malice in my heart or judgment, it is my opinion, based on reading this, that this person is in chronic denial. And this person is absolutely addicted to the trauma cycle, bond, whatever you want. He's on the hamster wheel where what's happened is that this borderline 5 years ago stimulated and brought to his conscious awareness the tremendous desire he has to finally get his mother to love him. And so the continuous push me, pull you of I love you, I hate you, come here, go away, you're the best, you're the worst. This is keeping this person in a constant state of trauma, and bear in mind that there's his survival instinct. If he doesn't get mom to love him, it will kill him. And so this is why people put up with this for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, because you get in on that hamster wheel and you can't get off. And it won't matter intellectually, even if you know that this is horrible for me. And you go through those periods of, why am I doing this? You know, I can't leave, I can't get out. And it's because your nervous system and your unconscious, unindividuated, infantile, regressed mind has to get mommy to love you, because if you don't, you'll die, just like those infants. It's a very real, it's more powerful than anything any of us can say or do. So what ends up happening is that we justify it. We find ways to justify it. And so let me give you an example of how this person admits that they are on a roller coaster that they can't get off. They admit that in there that obviously it's toxic and that he had to get out, according to him, assuming that the way he describes it is accurate, that he had to get out because he had hit rock bottom and the abuse was more than he could tolerate. So he left, but he's still committed to her, which means I'm still going to get mommy to love me. I'm going to get her to love me, because he doesn't understand that even though he's an adult, he still believes that if she doesn't love him, he will die. If you've been in that experience, I know I have. There's nothing like a borderline. I mean, you can be a codependent with all of these tendencies your whole life, just like me. But when a borderline comes along, they go straight to the deepest part of your unconscious, and you end up reliving that very serious survival trauma. There is nothing more intense than this. The trauma of if I don't get her to love me, I'm going to die. And I can remember, I just recently listened to one of my first videos that I made when I had first, literally the day that I went no contact, I started this channel. And if you go back to if you search by date, you go back to my earliest videos, you'll see me talking about this ball of anxiety that was in my solar plexus. And it literally felt like it was killing me. And in fact, one of the things that frightened me so much that I got out of the relationship with no contact and started doing the four things was because I was very certain that if I stayed in that emotional state of trauma and distress, that it would cause me cancer. I could feel, the toxicity just flowing through my body. And I happened to know somebody who, extremely conscious person, married a borderline, whirlwind romance, got married almost immediately, and then after the roller coaster of that and not realizing what he had gotten himself into, he ended up having 2 kids with the borderline, and he is now thankfully recovering from almost certain death. He had got some really good treatment, but his cancer almost destroyed him. And I'm continuing to hope for his continued recovery. But he at one point admitted to me, I haven't talked to him recently about it, but I'm of the definite belief that that's what caused him his cancer, was the trauma, reliving that trauma of, if mommy doesn't love me, I'm going to die. So that's what's happening here. But because it is such a deeply intense survival mechanism, the brain works to justify it. Now, if you can't justify it in normal terms, like, well, we get along, or, we make a good match, so I did that. I was in a marriage that wasn't that great, and, I came up with justifications for it. It actually was slightly abusive, and she, I think, had borderline tendencies, but nothing like the borderline that I picked later on. But I remember coming up with all kinds of, justifications, rationalizations of, well, nothing's perfect and got to make the most of it. And I committed to her, things like that. But when you're in a relationship that is obviously horrifically destructive and dysfunctional and is going nowhere, it's worse than going nowhere, it's destroying your life, you still can't shake the survival instinct that says, if I don't get mommy to love me, I will die. And so that anxiety of that becomes so strong, you can't get rid of it. I can remember literally, and I kid you not, I'm not hyperbolizing here. Every single moment, no matter what I was doing, underneath the surface, there was, it felt like 30, 40% of my energy, even when I was deeply engrossed in a task, was completely, totally focused on her. What is she thinking right now? Where is she? Is she thinking about me? Is she going to call me if I've been discarded? Is she going to call me back? Will we end up together? What can I do? Maybe I should have said this. If I do this, then maybe she'll love me. If I don't say that, maybe she won't. And is she with somebody else? And if I was with her, it was the same. She happened to not be in the room. I was just constantly thinking about it. So, unlike the borderline, who doesn't have object constancy, if you are a non-disordered codependent partner, you have nothing but object constancy. They're not in the room, you can't stop thinking about them. Whereas if you're a borderline, it's the opposite. The moment you leave the room, they forget you exist. And that is the logical progression of that. We are, they say that borderlines are failed narcissists because they can't keep up the perfect firewall facade of, I'm a perfect God, worship me. That psychopathic facade fails, and then they regress back into the very needy infant that love bombs. And then when the love gets too real, they get frightened, and then they go into the psychopath, and they bounce back and forth. So they're called secondary psychopaths. They're called failed narcissists. Well, I would say that the non-disordered codependent is a failed borderline. Because think about it. The reason why when you leave the room, the borderline forgets you exist, is a defense mechanism. Because if they did have object constancy, their horrific fear of being abandoned and unloved, which again feels like death, because that's what happens to infants. If they're abandoned and neglected, they die from lack of love and attention. They are so much more close to actually dying from it that in order to survive, they have to dissociate. So it's a defense mechanism. You leave the room, they dissociate. That's what was going on with Amber Heard and Johnny Depp when he first realized, when he's going, why is she making me go to bed at a certain time? Well, it's because if she leaves the room and goes to her most vulnerable state, which is the state of falling asleep, she's going to be reminded of being an infant, that there was no mommy there to lull her to sleep, and she felt like going to sleep was dying. So I feel quite certain that what she wanted, consciously or unconsciously, was, we're connected, I love you, now I need to go to sleep, come with me, because if you don't come with me, you'll disappear. And if you disappear, I will die. And this is why they get so furious. This is why they love you one day and this is something happened between me and my borderline where, I lived somewhere else and she didn't want me to be anywhere else. And, if I would go back to my home for a couple of days, 3 hours away, she would start to freak out in the beginning and didn't want me to be away from her. It's because she didn't, the love bombing stage and for her, the idealization stage, she wanted to keep it going. And she knew that if I disappeared, she would dissociate, and she didn't want to lose what she thought was the love that was going to heal her. In fact, at one point, she wanted us to record our talks and our promises. And she was saying, no, this is actually a spiritual thing. I want this recorded so that I can watch it later. And I was like, okay. It was a little weird, but okay. But now looking back on it, she knew she was going to dissociate. She knew, she didn't know the words for it, but she knew that she didn't have object constancy. And so when we were sitting there talking and she was saying, and Mike, say again what you're going to do, and I'm going to do this for you. And then she says, and then she talked to the camera like she's talking to herself. And what I'm going to do for Mike is I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And, she kept on saying, I'm telling you, this is really important for me because sometimes I forget things. Which is her, she wasn't educated in BPD, so that was her way of saying, I dissociate and I'm going to forget you and I don't want to. This feels really good and I don't want to forget you. So we have the same thing that the borderlines have, but we are failed borderlines because the intense pain that comes from when they aren't with us, mommy's not with us, we then go through this horrific pain of neglect and feeling like we're going to die if mommy isn't here to love us. And unfortunately, we don't have the ability to dissociate, or fortunately, however you want to look at it. So it's the same thing. They dissociate and forget about you because it's a defense mechanism, because the moment you leave the room, they start to die. Because they've found the love, and the love stimulates their regressed feelings of mommy's, where is mommy? I'm dying. And they're screaming and crying. And I remember hearing about a borderline who had a kid. By the way, the fastest way to create a borderline is to have a kid with a borderline. She was talking about how it was either a borderline was talking about what her mother said, or I can't remember. But in any case, one borderline, having had a kid, she couldn't tolerate hearing her child cry. So she'd go and sit in the car for hours. So that means that little baby was crying and crying and crying. Nobody there to pick up the little baby and take care of her. And it's because hearing a baby cry reminds the borderline of their own pain. Just normal crying. That's why I have the little icon of the little crying babies, because whether you're a codependent or a borderline, that's the core of it. There's this little crying infant that needs mommy's love, and mom doesn't show up. All right, so that's what's going on with this person here, is that this person can't leave, because if he does, the pain of mommy will never love me feels like it's going to kill him. So he's going to go into deep denial, and he's going to convince himself that this is actually the most spiritual thing he can do. So not only does he justify it, he spiritualizes it. I'll tell you where he does that. He says, I left the home at the point of breakdown. I understand now that I am a codependent, even though he's not doing the 4 things, because if the logic is, if you follow my channel and you admit that you're a codependent, then that means you follow that by doing the 4 things. So just stating verbally that you know you're a codependent is meaningless if you don't follow it up with the action. So that's great that you know you're a codependent, but if that doesn't spur you to do the work, then you're still in denial. You still think that the impossible is possible. And that's the sad part. Mommy will never love you. If you haven't gotten it from your mom yet, you're not going to, and you're not going to get it from your borderline either. They are wired to deny you that. So he says, I understand now I'm a codependent. I take my share of the blame and accept why we both are attracted to each other. There is power in that. It is a journey. I am healing whilst still committed to my relationship, albeit am unable to live with my partner at this time. I'm helping her to do the same. We believe that if we do the work one day, we might be able. Okay, so he goes on, and then finally he says at the end, he says, I could go on, but my point is, and this is the whole point of his comment, that there is a reason we come together and so much harm and trauma takes place. We can leave or we can stay and take the lessons. So he's saying that it's God's will, that this is how he's going to spiritually progress, is if he chooses to stay and be abused. And he says, we can leave or we can stay and take the lessons, as though there's some spiritual lesson that's going to happen if he continues to repeat the exact same process over and over again. And that's all it is. If he talks about how we're both going to individually heal, but he doesn't seem to understand that he has somebody who has a mental illness, which means that somebody doesn't have logical thinking. So if you have somebody who has a mental illness, meaning their thinking is disordered, they have a disorder, how can somebody's disordered thinking fix them? So what does that mean? The borderline is on their own and they're going to learn how to heal themselves? How can they do that? They have this continuous, their brain is constantly skipping and missing and dissociating, and how's it going to fix itself? It doesn't. It's only going to get fixed if to whatever level is possible if they get therapy. He makes no mention of either of them being in therapy. He makes no mention of doing the 4 things. He says, I've been watching your channel for a year, and yet he knows that the main thing that I say is that number 1 is you have to go full no contact, meaning you have to make it impossible for them to contact you. So the whole point of this comment is he wants to argue with me about it. Now, being a good codependent, he's obviously, the reason why he's been able to, quote, stay together for 5 years is because he obviously is very good at negotiating and placating and avoiding his own rage and his own anger. So because mommy won't stay if he gets angry, and actually says, you're hurting me. I'm mad at you. I'm furious with you. Mommy won't be able to tolerate that. So he suppresses that, and he learns how to be a very good negotiator, and he's compliant. So instead of telling me the truth, which is what he really wants to say is, Mike, I've been watching your channel for a year now, and I hate it every time that you say that I have to go no contact to heal, because I'm going to die if she doesn't love me, and I'm going to make it work. And so there's a reason that I'm here, and this is God's will, and I can leave, like you say, or I can stay and I can learn the deep, profound spiritual lessons, because there's some reason that the universe has brought us together. I don't know what it is. It's horrifically painful. It's killing me, but I am willing to submit to the will of God, and that's all this is. That's all this is. He says he's aware that he's a codependent, but he doesn't take the action. He seems to be aware that his partner is borderline, but he doesn't understand that the fact that she's a borderline means, by definition, that being untreated, it is impossible for her to love him. He doesn't understand the dynamic that when you love a borderline, the inevitable result is that they must devalue you. They must discard you. They must abuse you. They can't help it. That's part of their disorder. So he says all of this, he has all this intellectual knowledge, and none of that knowledge. Watching my channel for a year, he's heard me say the same thing over and over and over, but none of that information has given him the ability to go, you know what, she's never going to love me. This has nothing to do with her anyway. I'm just projecting my own mommy needs onto her, and I need to go fix myself. And the kindest thing I can do for her is to leave her and to, give her the opportunity to go get therapy if she wants it. This is the result of my channel. Why you watch my channel for a year and you don't get that? Well, I do understand, because you are still under the delusion that you'll die if you don't get this particular damaged individual who's unable to love you. You're still trying to get this person to love you because you think you'll die if you don't. And you've pushed it down so far that it's now in your unconscious, which is driving all of your actions. But on a conscious level, you're going to act as though, you know what, I could leave if I wanted to, but the truth is that, God is calling me, and we're here for some reason, and there's some reason, and I don't know what that is, but there's value and power in that, and I want to learn the spiritual lessons that come with being repeatedly abused over and over again, and it gets worse every time, and it never gets resolved, and it's always the same fight, every single time. But I don't know what it is, but God will reveal it to me. And this is all just chronic denial. It's spiritualizing. It's on the verge of psychopathic. Because if you go past that line, then you can't even tell what reality is. So he says, we can leave or we can stay and take the lessons. If we can both heal, I don't know why he's talking about we and both. This is that enmeshment. Enmeshment means a lack of individuation. You don't know where you stop and the other person begins. Your identity is linked to another person. You don't have an identity. In fact, by yourself, you don't have an existence. And this is, again, a lesser form of what the borderline is. The borderline is like that all the time. Why, when you leave the room, they dissociate because it's too painful, you don't exist. Oh, somebody else is there. Okay, now I'm part of you. Oh, that person leaves, I dissociate. Oh, you're back now. Now I'm part of you. So this is the same thing for the partner. The partner isn't quite as psychotic about it, meaning that the non-disordered partner still has an identity and object constancy, but it's the same thing. And he has to keep repeating we and both of us because he doesn't have an identity without her. That's what he means when he says there's a reason we've come together. In other words, his identity is actually completely locked into the two of them. And if they don't exist, he doesn't exist. So this isn't somebody who is choosing to do the good thing and the spiritual thing. This isn't somebody who's trying to do something healthy and we're going to work it out and come together. This is somebody who is in deep denial and in a huge amount of pain. And I could go on and on as well, but I will stop there. And let's see, there's one other comment I thought was relevant. I won't go too deep into it. This one says, thanks for sharing. This is in response to my video. Is your is your ex BPD or NPD? How can you tell the difference? He says, thanks for sharing. I think part of the question for me as a BPD person, you know what? I'm going to forget I said anything. I don't make comments about BPD people. So, because I'm not borderline and I don't know how to recover, what I've seen is that DBT therapy works really well. If you do it regularly, go to group therapy and do the workbook exercises. So anyways, I thought this was just a normal person, forgive me for saying so. I thought this was a non-disordered person, but actually that's a BPD. So I'm not going to make any comments about that. All right, so I told you I was going to tell you the exact 4 things, and here's what I guarantee you. If you're still watching, if you're in pain, there are 4 very specific things that if you do these 4 things completely, thoroughly, exactly as I described them to you, my guarantee to you is that you will completely heal from the damage done to you by your borderline or narcissist partner if you are non-disordered. You will not be healed from your codependence. You'll still have codependent tendencies for the rest of your life, but your life will get a lot better. But imagine being in a place where you don't even think about them. You forget their name. You remember them the same way you remember that one time that you had a really bad fever, or that one time that you broke your arm, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember that, and I remember it being really painful, but I forgot about it. How would you like to be in a place where you don't think about them every day, you don't still worry about whether or not you'll ever be loved, all the stuff that you're still dealing with, or like this guy who can't leave the relationship? Imagine never having to feel that ever again about that person. That's what I guarantee you if you do the 4 things. The 4 things are very simple. Number 1, you go complete no contact, which means you make it impossible for them to contact you ever again. You're married? Great. You get a divorce and you have your lawyer be the go-between. You never talk to them again. Your lawyer either talks to them or to their lawyer. You have kids? Great. You do everything in your power to get full custody, and whether or not you're able to pull that off, you still have the lawyer be the go-between. You never discuss with the other person ever. You never meet with them. You only have your lawyer do the go-between for you. So that's number 1. You go complete no contact, and you make it impossible for them to contact you ever again for the rest of your life. Number 2, you work all 12 steps of Codependence Anonymous, or whatever 12-step group you're most comfortable with. You can go to coda.org. That's the letter coda.org. And I didn't say go to meetings and like it. I said work the steps. That means you have to go to meetings either through Skype, whether there's meetings in your neighborhood or not, doesn't matter. You can go on and go to a Skype meeting anywhere in the world. You get a sponsor, and you keep asking somebody to sponsor you until you find somebody who's willing to walk you through the steps. And you especially work to get to step 4 as soon as is reasonably possible, so you can work through your resentments. And then you finish all 12 steps and then become available to sponsor somebody else. Those first 2 steps are non-negotiable. If you don't do those first 2 steps, in my experience, you may not ever completely heal. Like an illness that never really goes away. If you're lucky, you might get some relief, but it'll always come back. Not only that, but you might end up with another borderline or a narcissist, tout suite. So first 2 steps are, number 1, you go complete no contact. Number 2, you work all 12 steps of coda.org. Number 3 is, when you can afford it, you work with a psychologist. Number 4 is that you do some kind of meditative practice. Now, things 3 and 4 are not required, because, as I've already showed you, I did a review of a therapist, a licensed psychologist, who wrote a book, which I did the review, said this is not complete recovery. I don't believe this therapist is even completely recovered or understands what codependence is. So the great thing about psychology is that it can pry open your unconscious, and you can see, oh, I'm trying to get mom's love, all the stuff I said earlier. You can understand that, but that understanding won't give you the power in and of itself for most people to change. So this is why thing 3 is not a requirement, because a lot of people, when I was first coming on here saying do the 4 things, and I'd say, are you doing the 4 things? They're saying, yeah, I'm doing 1 and 3, or I'm doing 3 and 4, or I'm doing 1 and 4. And I'd say, that's not how it works. You have to do all 4 of them. So really, the truth is you have to do 1 and 2, because if you can't afford to get a therapist, wait until you can. It's okay, because the therapy, as I said, isn't the magic bullet. It's just a nice little adjunct that goes along with it. But 1 and 2 are absolutely essential. If you don't do them, in my experience, you may not ever heal. So those are the 4 things. Go no contact, do the 12 steps, work with a therapist, and have some kind of meditative practice. And if you do that, I guarantee you, you will completely heal. And if you don't, then like, a bad infection that never really goes away, you'll still have it, no matter what you do, no matter what you tell yourself. So that's it for me, guys. Again, I could still talk about this for hours, but I'm going to leave it at that. I wish you guys all the best. Do the 4 things and heal, or don't, and you get whatever you're going to get. So I will see you guys next time. Take care of yourselves, and yeah, watch out for those bear traps.